The story that we usually hear about the American Revolution is about the revolution as a unifying event. The story that I want to tell in Independence, the Tangled Roots of the American Revolution, is about how it was a much more complicated event than that. It was both unifying and divisive. It both brought Americans together and divided them through violence and different visions of the way the world should work. During the revolution itself, for example, never more than 40 to 45% of Americans supported the war. At least a third of Americans were fighting on the other side. So in trying to understand the revolution, we need to understand it in its greater complexity, while at the same time trying to tell a story that's about both the ways in which people came together and the ways in which they drew farther and farther apart. We talk about the Civil War sometimes as the war against, in which Americans fought against Americans. But in fact, in the American Revolution, you had far more often neighbors fighting against neighbors, relatives fighting against relatives, than you did in the Civil War. In the Civil War, you had people from two different regions fighting it, but you weren't fighting against your next door neighbor. And the other thing that we don't know that's an important part of this story is that of all the wars that Americans have fought in, the war in which the highest percentage of the population died was the American Revolution. Now, what does that mean? It means that more people who lived through the American Revolution lost someone in that war, knew someone who died. Now that tends to do both of the things that I was talking about. It both divides Americans, violence divides people. It also brings people together. This sense of loss, of shared risk, shared sacrifice was one of the unifying characteristics of the war as well. It's important for people to examine the story of independence again because it's a much more important story today than we often fully recognize, and because it's a more complicated story, has unifying as well as divisive characteristics about it that will help us to understand the world in which we live today.
A production of the University of Rochester. Please visit us online and subscribe to our channel for more videos.